progress.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mike Torres, the Interim Director of the Curriculum Frameworks and Instructional Resources Division at the California Department of Education. Today, I'm pleased to be hosting the last of 3 webinars on the California Digital Learning Integration and Standards Guidance that was adopted by the State Board of Education on May 12th of this year. The intent of the guidance adopted by the State Board of Education is to support effective implementation of technology to foster student learning and address critical areas of instructional focus. While the legislation that called for this guidance was passed when most of California schools were providing instruction through distance learning, the State Board of Education and the authors of the document recognized the opportunity to document and strengthen the use of educational technology in all instructional settings, including in person. As a result, we have a document that supports the integration of digital pedagogy and tools to enhance, extend, and reshape learning in all settings. Please note that this document does not constitute new content standards. Rather, it provides new structures of organization for English language arts, English language development, and mathematics content standards. The intent is to support holistic and integrated instruction. The title of this webinar is Mathematics Standards Guidance, as the focus is Section B, Mathematics. It is important to call out that this adopted guidance does not replace standards and frameworks. It does not represent a new mandate, and it does not intend to narrow the curriculum. Rather, the intent is to leverage lessons learned during the disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic and support educators to sharpen instructional focus while integrating technology to strengthen learning in all settings. Today, we are fortunate to have members of our esteemed writing team joining us along with panels of guest practitioners who will provide their insights on the implementation of the guidance. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping details. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted later on the CDE Digital Learning and Standards Guidance webpage so that you may return to it or recommend it to others. Also, the chat function is disabled, so please use the Q&A function to post any questions you may have for the presenters and panelists. Now I'd like to acknowledge the Sacramento County Office of Education, the lead agency charged with developing the guidance. They assembled a highly regarded team of authors for this project. The writing team and Sacramento County Office of Ed staff have worked tirelessly to shepherd this project to its completion. Please welcome my co-host, Dr. Nancy Hirota, Deputy Superintendent of the Sacramento County Office of Education, Content Development Team members, Dr. Joe Bowler and Kathy Williams, and our panelists, Ellen Barger, Assistant Superintendent, Santa Barbara County Office of Education, Jean Maddox, 5th grade teacher, Visalia Unified School District, and Kim Webb, Curriculum Specialist, Tulare County Office of Education. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Hirota.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm Nancy Hirota, and I'm very pleased to share with you highlights of this project. And as you can see on the slide, we put together a very diverse team to pull this together. On behalf of the State Board of Education and in collaboration with the California Department of Education, here at the Sacramento County Office of Education, we served as the lead agency to develop the California Digital Learning Integration and Standards Guidance. And we developed a very strong organizational structure by contracting with the International Society for Technology and Education, referred to as ISTE, to serve as the lead organization to coordinate the writing team and to develop the final product. We also are working with computer using educators known as CUE, and given their extensive technology expertise working with educators in California, they have been a key contributor in this project. We're also very pleased to have convened a team of nationally recognized experts to address all of the topics that were identified in this legislation. And these content areas include a focus on English language arts, English Language Development, led by Dr. Hallie Yop and Nancy Brynelson, who were also the authors of the ELA-ELD frameworks. We also have with us the team that wrote the mathematics section, Dr. Joe Bowler and Kathy Williams. And please note that Dr. Joe Bowler is also part of the team convened by CDE working on the revisions of the mathematics framework. We also worked with Dr. Catherine Kennedy from ISTE, who wrote the section on digital learning. And in the area of assessment, Dr. Douglas Fisher and Dr. Nancy Fry were key contributors. And in the area of social emotional learning, Dr. Lorea Martinez. To guide the work of this project, we convened a distance learning advisory committee, but we also gathered input from stakeholders that included parents, caregivers, and students to inform the development of this guide. And as you can see on this slide, the advisory committee included content experts from AVID, the Math Frameworks writing team, the California Subject Matter Project, and Californians Together. We also worked with educators from school districts in Madera and Modesto, as well as our county office colleagues from El Dorado, Imperial, Kern, San Bernardino, San Diego, and Tulare County. We also work very closely with our professional associations and educational associations that included the California Charter Schools Association, the California Teachers Association, Policy Analysis for California Education, the Education Trust West, the PTA, and the California Federation of Teachers. And I have to share with you the advisory committee, they were so valuable in not only providing input as we shared draft copies of the guidance, they helped us to not only refine the document, but they also provided assistance in identifying high quality interactive online materials that are included in this guide. Also, the guide includes voices from the field. So we have educators who were interviewed, and our advisory members were instrumental in identifying educators to be interviewed for this project. Next slide. In addition to the advisory committee, we also expanded our outreach efforts. And in this effort, we worked with CSES's Curriculum and Instruction Steering Committee. And in this effort, we worked with the CISC Math Subcommittee, as well as the CISC English Language Arts, English Language Development Subcommittee members to gather input. And then in addition, to amplify the voices of students and parents, we partnered with Families in Schools and Californians for Justice to gather feedback from parents, caregivers, and students from across the state. The feedback that we gathered were gathered through both virtual stakeholder sessions as well as surveys that were conducted and completed by colleague parents and students from, again, throughout the state. The next slide. So the California Digital Learning Integration and Standards Guidance supports the effective integration of digital learning as students return to school. And it's important to note that this guidance is organized in 3 sections that include resources and appendices, and that the guidance throughout all sections of this document supports the effective integration of digital learning, whether you are teaching in an in-person environment or in a virtual environment. As you can see on the slide, Section A addresses research-based distance learning principles and practices, and Sections B and C are based on the California Common Core Standards and the teaching and learning guidance in the frameworks. These sections focus on standards guidance in the content areas, and they serve as companion documents to the draft math framework as well as the ELA-ELD framework. These sections also include strategies to integrate digital learning focused on these content areas. Today, we will be focusing on Section B that provides standards guidance for mathematics, and we will be joined by Dr. Joe Bowler and Kathy Williams, who will be sharing highlights of Section B. In addition, as I shared with you, we had the opportunity to hear from educators from across the state. So this guidance incorporates interviews, vignettes, and spotlights featuring illustrative examples of classroom practices throughout all of the chapters. The vignettes and the vignettes and the interviews, they showcase California educators, and they provide examples of topic-specific recommended strategies and resources for educators as they teach within and design digital learning environments. The goal was to highlight best practices throughout the guide, to bring the content to life, and to provide examples of this work in action. So at this time, I'm very pleased to turn it over to Dr. Joe Bowler and Kathy Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Hirota. Thank you, everybody. Hi, my name is Jo Bowler. I'm a professor at Stanford, and I'm going to be sharing some examples from section B. Kathy and I both worked on taking all of the standards in mathematics and raising them to the level of big ideas. So section B provides information about digital learning in mathematics for both in-person and online learning environments. And it presents standards and instructional guidance to support the continuum of learning from TKK through grade 10. And it prioritizes critical areas of instructional focus for each grade level, which we do through highlighting big ideas. So this serves as a companion resource to the California Common Core State Standards in Mathematics and the upcoming 2022 Mathematics Framework for California that's in draft and going through processes at the moment. So chapter 4 talks about digital learning, gives lots of examples of really cool digital tools and ways to bring digital learning into mathematics and help students develop that digital literacy. Chapter 5 really focuses on standards and big ideas and takes on the perspective of the new proposed mathematics framework of teaching mathematics through big ideas and connections. And I'll share more about that in a moment. And chapters 6 to 9 has that actual big ideas and standards guidance organized by grade level. Chapter 4 is the section on preparing and supporting teachers for digital teaching and designing meaningful digital learning experiences, with lots of great examples of teachers doing really wonderful work in those arenas. So here's one of my favorite visuals from the new proposed mathematics framework for California. It's a visual that is giving meaning to some of the main approach of our framework, which is that students shouldn't just be doing maths questions for the reason of doing maths questions, but those maths questions should have a purpose, and they should be allowing kids to make connections and to investigate mathematically. And we say that there really could be 3 different reasons for doing mathematical investigations. Maybe students are doing them to make sense of the world. Maybe they're doing an investigation that helps them predict something that could happen. Or maybe they're doing an investigation that actually allows them to impact the future. One of the things highlighted in the upcoming framework and in this document is the importance of data. And when students do data investigations using data from their local environments and communities, they could really be asking questions that will help their community. So that's what we are getting at when we say that kids could be really impacting the future with their mathematical work. So the approach we took to prioritizing mathematics, obviously that's a very important endeavor to think about what is really a priority, what's most important. And I think this guidance came out in order to help teachers. I think a lot of teachers are overwhelmed by the amount of content they have to teach and all of the content that's set out in standards and in books. And so what we worked to do was to take all of that detailed content and to raise it to a level of big ideas. And so the organization of the content and the practice standards in this document as big ideas kind of raises those standards to that level. And it highlights the importance of the content and the practices. Also, as you'll see, as we get to the maps, we highlight the connections inside mathematics. Mathematics is a very connected subject. Mathematicians will always say, you know, it's a subject of a few big ideas and really important connections between them. And often those connections are lost when people look at individual standards. So we've really tried to bring those connections back in this work. So this is one of the network maps. And this is illustrating what you see in this document. And we provided these network maps to show all of the mathematical connections as well as the important ideas. So if you're wondering what is a big idea in mathematics, we use a definition that comes from Charles and Carmel of a big idea is a statement of an idea that's central to the learning of mathematics, one that links numerous mathematical understandings into a coherent whole. And as I said, those linkages are really clear, I hope, in the network maps. And we've taken this approach because we know from research that a big idea approach to mathematics has been shown to really engage students and to increase achievement and understanding. We have many examples of great teachers who, instead of teaching two methods, as textbooks often set out, they've really worked out what are the big ideas in my course, and I'm going to teach to those. And for each big idea, they bring in deep, rich activities that focus on that big idea. So in our networks, maps, and in the writing that goes with them, we have brought together mathematical content and practices. So this is we're going to show you three different grade levels to illustrate this. This shows you our network map and big ideas for grade 2. And in the mathematics framework, the proposed framework, the content is organized in 4 different strands, and we're showing those 4 strands. All of the network maps are color-coded, so you can see the strands. One of the areas in the new framework is called communicating stories with data. Those are the red that you see there: measure and compare objects, represent data. And one thing people ask us is, what does it mean that these nodes have different sizes? And what that means is that a node is bigger, like represent data, because it has a lot of overlapping standards with other big ideas. And so that's a really important idea in grade 2. In the purpley colors, you see things from exploring changing quantities. So we've got dollars and cents, problem solving with measure, and you can see that those are connected to other areas. In the blue, taking wholes apart, putting parts together, we have number strategies, and the green area is discovering shape and space, where we have squares in an array and seeing fractions in shapes. So each of these nodes has a lot of standards inside it. And in this approach, we're saying, really, you can teach to this big idea, and you will be covering all of these different standards inside this meaningful activity. We don't have to teach them separately. We can bring them together through engaging activities. And so we're going to share some examples of those activities. And I think Kathy is going to tell you about the first one, which is in grade 2.
Hi, everyone. Our first big idea is seeing fractions and shapes that we're going to share with you. And this is color-coded in the greens that Joe was just describing in the network map. And it's the content connection for this is discovering space or shape and space. And what we've done is we've taken standards and we've looked at the grade 2 standards. And if you browse through them, you'll notice that in geometry, they'll talk about studying rectangles and unit squares within rectangles. But And it'll also mention rectangles when in measurement and data and talking about things that we can use within measurement and data and collecting information. So we've combined geometry standards 1, 2, and 3 with measurement and data standards 7. And in looking at those and thinking about activities, thinking about the big idea of this, we combined them into a few sentences that states that divide circles and rectangles into equal shares and know them to be standard unit fractions. Identify and draw 2D and 3D shapes, recognizing faces and angles. So as we looked at those standards, we looked at the wording, we looked at the underlying meanings of these standards, we thought, what are the connections here? What is the big idea? And you can see, read into this. Well, if we're talking about unit fractions, we're starting to move away. We're building the understanding of multiplication in grade 2, and unit fraction is a piece of that. And if we look at it through a lens with representations that are visual, it's a lot easier for students to make connections with numbers and space and shape. So we'll look at the next example here. And on the left, this is a grade 2 sample activity that we included here in this presentation. And on the left, you'll see a grid, an evenly gridded out rectangle that's broken into a length of 4 and a width of 5. And so you can see all the squares there. And so you can start, this is an example of having students start to say, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? And they can move on and start to think about, they might notice that it's evenly incremented and that the squares are all the same size. And we can build from there to talk about unit lengths and how many squares are in here. We can bridge that then to the visual on the right is a wooden pallet. And the wooden pallet is showing boxes that are all the same size, and they're stacked up with a width of 4 and a length of 4, and then a height of 5. So it's as if a vertical slice of these boxes, if we look at that, would be representing the 4 by 5 two-dimensional rectangle that we've shown that's gridded. And in here we can start to have conversations with students about, okay, we're moving from 2 dimensions into 3. Let's talk about, they'll start to notice, oh, that's as if there's a slice and the slices are repeated 4 times. Or they might see it as rows of boxes and the rows are repeated and stacked on top of each other. Through this, we can build connections. We can connect to multiplication. We can connect to unit fractions. And we can talk about a slice or a box being a unit fraction or a slice of them or a row of them. There's all kinds of different representations we can see. And there is the technology that can come in. Students can build, there are different pieces of technology out there where they can have visualizing something that looks like a cube, or as Joe would say, a cuboid, or Joe calls a prism a cuboid. So we could think of, let's use your British word here, your cuboids. We could stack a lot of cuboids together. We could do that visually with an app or with software. We could make grids in 2 dimensions, try to draw in 3. Students could take this image and color code it on a device like a tablet or something. There's all kinds of ways that we can integrate technology into this space with the visuals.
Mm-hmm. And I love this because one of the most important areas of mathematics out there in the world, in Silicon Valley, is spatial visualization. It's turning out to be a really central part of mathematics, and we often don't give students that much opportunity to think in 3D. So yeah, this is a great example for that.
Yeah, it's an interesting time with our minds to think. Often even our textbooks, they'll have 3-dimensional drawings in a 2-dimensional space. And that can be really challenging for students. We have Stanford students that talk about that they wish they would have had more experience in actual 3 dimensions. So in the building of it and with technology, you can use different packages that really try to support that and the visualization of that. And then you can also be building it next to you and actually have boxes. A teacher could bring in, have parents,
bring in shoe boxes.
Yeah, they say collect some boxes at home and let's talk about this, or anything that they might have that students could build with in a virtual environment or at home.
So I'm going to share a grade 8 example. So here's the network map for grade 8.
Beautiful course.
And you may look at this and think, wow, there's a lot going on in this network map. That actually shows something amazing because it shows a very connected and that content that we have in grade 8. And, you know, a lot of students have skipped over this course, which is a shame because it's got some really important mathematics and mathematical connections. So what we see on here, I can sort of go through it with you. I know there's a lot to look at. Is that red strand, again, is our data strand, communicating stories with data. So we have data explorations, interpret scatter plots, that has lots of connections with other content, data graphs and tables, also big node with lots of connections between content. And then in the purple, which is exploring changing quantities, we have slopes and intercepts, linear equations, and multiple representations of functions, which is so important. And they connect with each other. They also connect with those other areas. Taking wholes apart and putting parts together in blue, we have Pythagoras, big and small numbers, cylindrical investigations. And in the green area, which is discovering shape in space, shape, number, and expressions, and transformational geometry. And as you can see, that's a lot there. There's a lot of content, but focusing in on that amount of content, that amount of descriptions, is much more helpful, we've found, for teachers than all the smaller content that comes listed under that. But I'll show an example from a lesson that I really like.
You know, and when you consider connections, it just, you know, it may seem like a lot, but when we start to see connections and think of it through big ideas, it may seem overwhelming, but when you get into it and start teaching that way, it's easier, it's more streamlined.
So we're going to look at an example that comes under the big idea, interpret scatter plots. That gets at a couple of the content connections from the framework, communicating stories with data, and exploring changing quantities. And we've brought in the standards for this one, which include constructing and interpreting data visualizations, including scatter plots for bivariate measurement data using two-way tables, describing patterns, noticing whether the data appear in clusters, whether they're linear or non-linear, whether there are outliers, and if the association is negative or positive, and interpreting the trends looking at the data points over time. And so the activity we think is great for this is using some software, which we really like, that is called CodeApp. And if you go to CodeApp, it's free software, and it really nicely gives students an opportunity to visualize data and to explore data. So there's a data set inside CodeApp that is a large data set of mammals and lots of things about mammals, like how much do they sleep, how much do they run, how much do they eat, what is their height and their weight, and how long do they live, and things that will fascinate students. And so I like to give this activity out and just ask people, investigate this data set of mammals, ask questions of the data. And you can see a little bit of student work here that this particular students have asked, is there a relationship between the height of mammals and their sleep, the number of hours they sleep? And what they've found, as you can see, is that there is a relationship. So it's really getting at the big idea that I just talked about, where they're looking for relationships, they're seeing it visually, they're working with bivariate data of sleep and height. And these students notice, and you probably can see this on here, that there is an outlier. And in case you're wondering which animal that is, that's about 2.5 meters tall and sleeps for 20 hours, the answer is it's a lion. So the students who worked in this activity got into an interesting discussion about why the lion was an outlier in this way. So really great, engaging activity.
And if you're wondering about the technology and wondering about CodeApp, it's in this data set of mammals, you go in and you see the data set, and you can just take one of the data sets, let's say the column of height, drag it over to the graph as this was made, and then drag sleep over to the vertical axis, and there's the data. And then there's
very intuitive.
Yeah, lots of ways to interact with the data. Students pick it up.
Yeah.
And love it.
Yeah, as Kathy said, you can just drag and drop things and say, oh, I want to see the mean, or I want to see the standard deviation that shows it on the graph. So They can look at the shape of data. A lot of those middle school standards are really, CodeUp is a great way of meeting those standards and really engaging for kids. So now we're going to look at a high school example.
You've been reading the graph so well, I'm going to let you read this one too.
Oh, thanks.
No problem, my friend.
This is the Integrated One course. One of the messages of the new proposed California Maths Framework is that integrated mathematics is really important and really is the way to go. And you see in this Integrated One course a lot of really meaningful connections. So what we see here, again, lots of data in the communicating stories with data. We have comparing models is a big area, variability is a big area that people often think of in an abstract way, but we've brought into data, correlation and causation, and then exploring changing quantities, we have systems of equations. Oh, and I forgot comparing model. Oh, no, I said that, I think. And then under taking wholes apart and putting parts together, we have composing functions, and then discovering shape and space is shapes in structures and transformations and congruence. So I love to see that high school content combined together with those meaningful connections that are often pulled apart. Students don't learn these in connected ways. And we have a lovely activity that teaches some of this.
So we're really excited to share this activity. It's the big idea for this modeling with functions. And this has a content connection that actually fits two of the categories. And we selected it to fit communicating stories with data as our color coding for red, but it also satisfies exploring changing quantities and illustrates that. So sometimes you'll see in the content connections, we'll list more than one content connection for that. This grade 8 standard talks about building functions that model relationships between two quantities. It includes examples with inequalities using units and different representations. Describe and interpret the relationships modeled using visuals, tables, and graphs. And in here, the modeling with functions, it's an exciting time for students. The technologies you've seen, we could use CodeApp for this. We could have shown you another CodeApp example, or there's other lots of technology out there available to support students in this learning. But in the example we chose, this is one of the ones we've just discovered. And we're really excited about it. So we've selected as an integrated Math 1 sample activity. And this is an activity that comes from the American Natural History Museum and was shared with us by our friends at MBARI, which is the Monterey Bay Aquarium and Research Institute. We're going to be releasing a YouCube version of this lesson on our website in the next few weeks, where we'll focus in on mathematics and talk about the mathematics that's inside of this. But what you'll see on the screen, you'll see a split view. On the top, you'll see a two-dimensional set of data that's been graphed. And here we're highlighting in blue the depth data for this blue whale. And you'll see the green data that's illustrated in green is the speed representations. Now, underneath it, you'll see two side-by-side video recordings. What's happening, the scientists at MBARI, they're actually going in and they're putting cameras that kind of suction cup onto the whale's top fin. And it has a front and a back view of the camera. So the left is showing the front view. You can hardly see it. And if I were to play this, because this actually plays for students, this is just a screenshot. It simultaneously shows where the data is. You can see the blue line in the top graph, the vertical black line, I guess it is. And it's showing this actual moment in data with the visual image. And that visual image on the left, you can very faintly see the head of the whale up ahead of you. The visual on the right is a little bit different. You can see the tail of the whale and what's happening. It's interesting. There's so many things students can talk about here. Why is the left darker and the right lighter? There's just so many things to talk about. And then they can look at the data and see if they can extract the meaning of the data. They can start to think about, wow, well, what is the depth? What is the speed? What does that even mean? And there's timestamps along the horizontal axis. There's depth in meters along the vertical axis. I love this because it's actually integrated out in integers. So students have, they've got to think about that for a bit because we are actually below the surface of the water with the whales. The scientists are doing this and sharing this because it's a new world. You can't observe a blue whale on any given day unless you use technology. You have cameras, you have ways of integrating this data into visuals like this for students. So we're excited to share this. There's a lot to be done here. Students could extract information, data, and they could then put it into CODAP, and they could start to say, well, let's see if we can model this function. Let's look for similarities and differences. Let's try to see, well, how can we connect this? What does this mean? What does this mean mathematically? What's the mathematics showing us? I've actually turned off jerk in this image. That's if we turn jerk on, that would take us clear into some calculus thinking, which is kind of exciting. So we're excited to share this. We're so happy that the Natural History Museum and Mbari are sharing these types of things, and we'll be doing more with this.
And the lesson from them is in chat right now. So if you want to go to that,
if you want to see it,
you'll, I think students are going to be so excited to actually watch a whale in motion and see the recordings and interpret that in terms of data.
And using the data, modeling functions, interpreting. There's so many things that can happen and that students can talk about and think about with modeling with functions. And this works as we like to think about. Joe and I do a lot of work. We talk about low floor, high ceiling tasks. This is an IM1 sample activity for integrated Math 1. However, it could be used in higher level classes as well as in Math 8.
Or in algebra class.
Yeah. In middle school, students could play with this and enjoy, I think, learning a lot more about whales in our environment.
So we're going to hand back now to Dr. Nancy Hirota.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Dr. Joe Bowler and Kathy Williams, for sharing highlights of what's included in Section B, which focuses on mathematics and particularly on how to integrate the use of technology in mathematics. So we are now going to shift to our panel discussion, and I'd like to begin by introducing each of our panelists. We have here with us this afternoon Ellen Barger, who is the Assistant Superintendent of the Santa Barbara County Office of Education. She is the chair of the Math Subcommittee, which is a part of the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association and the Curriculum Instruction Steering Committee. She also serves as a member of the California Mathematics Education Collaborative and serves on the CISC Executive Council, as well as the next chair-elect for the CISC committee. She also provides statewide leadership in the areas of LCAP and accountability. We also have with us today Jean Maddox. She is a fifth grade teacher in the Visalia Unified School District. Jean is a 32-year veteran teacher, mainly having taught in grades 3 through 5. She enjoys students getting excited about STEM, STEAM, especially mathematics, science, and engineering areas. We also have with us Kim Webb, who is a curriculum specialist at the Tulare County Office of Education. Kim is very passionate about developing students' love for learning, teachers' enthusiasm for teaching, and administrators' capacity to support instructional shifts. She has served as an educator in California's Central Valley for over 24 years as a classroom teacher, curriculum coach, teacher leader, adjunct professor, mathematics staff development, and curriculum specialist. So you can see that we've pulled together a very esteemed team of colleagues to share their perspectives. And so I'd like to pose the first question to Ellen Barger, and that is, Section B of this guidance presents standards guidance and instructional considerations for mathematics instruction, prioritizing critical areas of instructional focus. How will this guidance help teachers to enhance learning and promote equitable access for all students?
Thank you for that question, Nancy, and thank you to Joe and Kathy for such a great overview. I just want to start before I answer the question about prioritizing content. I just want to say to anyone for whom this is the only one of these webinars you've attended, take a moment and take the time to also look at Part A and to look at Chapter 4, because you will find so much up-to-date, rich, meaningful, authentic reflection of what you need for the classroom. But to the question that you asked, Nancy, I'm so glad you've asked it. And I'd like to start by saying that knowing mathematics for teaching, especially in TK through 12, is a very specialized kind of knowledge and quite different than understanding mathematics for any other mathematically intense profession or even just for yourself. And so this concept of taking the mathematics and prioritizing critical areas for instructional focus really honors the mathematics teaching profession in many ways. And I do want to say that looking at the big ideas, looking at the different altitudes and grain sizes does not mean that you ignore the list of standards or you ignore some of the other ways of organizing content, ideas, practices, skills, and concepts, but that this particular way of looking at content and practices for instruction is really, really important to the kind of work teachers do now. So I'd say first and foremost, it allows teachers to ask those questions that are really important to planning for instruction. The first question of the PLC, what do students need to know and be able to do? The big ideas, the organization and prioritization of the content really allows teachers to honor the assets and the knowledge that students bring to whatever grade or whatever course they're teaching, and understand that they're building on the work that was done before them, and they're setting the foundation for future learning. And so those big ideas allow teachers to zoom out and really talk about what is the residue, what is important. It allows them to plan with the end in mind. I think just as important as that is really about the teacher's knowledge. As I mentioned, the mathematical knowledge for teaching is something very special. And we know that what we're trying to build in our students has to first exist within ourselves. And that is a flexible, dynamic, interconnected web of concepts and ideas that allows us as educators, as teachers, to zoom in and zoom out and know just that right level of explicitness and in order to make those connections. And I think that the third element of all of this goes to systems. Nancy, you asked about teachers, but I really want to expand this to educators, because individual classroom teachers alone cannot be responsible by themselves for excellent, equitable, coherent, interconnected mathematics programs. We all know that we all contribute from TK to 12 across all subject areas to student knowledge. So this concept of big ideas and the organization and the first slide that Kathy and Joe showed about those three important types of thinking really allows a group of teachers or a group of educators to start with that end in mind, to make connections across grades and within the school day. Because as you read Part A, Part B, Chapter 4, you really understand that teaching mathematics is not a solitary pursuit, but it exists within the multi-layered work, the complex work that teachers have to do. So this offers that third point for teachers and educators together to be able to talk about knowledge standards at many, many different altitudes and many different grain sizes.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Well, let me pose the question to Jean, and that is, how will this guidance help teachers to enhance learning and promote equitable access outcomes for all students?
I think for me, because being the fifth grade teacher, and I'm sort of looking at what sense making they were doing when they were in fourth grade, so I can see that big idea, and then I can see what the sixth grade the big ideas are. I can then focus my instruction to make sure that all my students are engaged with it, whatever the task we're doing for my big ideas, and that they're able to access it. Because in the school that I'm at, I have a number of students that are English language learners. and looking at those big ideas and showing them and helping them make those connections. This is what you did in fourth grade. Now, this is how it is in fifth grade. Sixth grade, this is what's coming up. And that way, it makes it less complicated for me as the teacher to go back and look and go, okay, this is what they were doing here. I'm going to also check that math practice number 1 for making sense and persevering. How did it look in fourth grade? This is what I know it looks like in fifth grade. What is it going to look like in sixth grade? So it's a nice, comfortable way for a teacher to kind of look and then know what they need to be doing.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. And I'll turn the same question over to Kim.
As far as the equitable piece, I like the idea of where you're, I think my key word for this whole document is that connectiveness. And to Ellen's point of connectiveness, not only within my own grade level, but the connectiveness of within the, like what Jean said, between the different grade levels. And then within that connectiveness, I like the flexibility of things. So within that flexibility, as teachers are presenting these ideas in a big picture, kind of like what Joe and Kathy showed, where many standards are integrated, it allows for more access points for kids to come in. Whereas if we were so focused in that small grain of one particular standard and a specific problem type, I feel we limit the access to students of entering a problem. So example of which, where I am presenting a visual image, whether no matter what grade is it, whether for the example of like a multiplication, where in the past, I probably would have presented just a multiplication, the numbers themselves. But if I'm presenting in a visual image, I'm allowing for kids to notice and wonder. I'm allowing kids to ask questions, that curiosities that people have been bringing up between Joe and Kathy and everyone else. Now, and to me, my goal when I go in and work with teachers, like, am I allowing lots of avenues and thinking about those focus students, those students that are on the edges, where everyone, I don't care if they've been labeled high, which we should not be doing that anyway, or if they've been labeled shy or EL or newcomers, that they have an access point to the math. So that's what I appreciate about this guidance document, being very open and flexible, but also in the meanwhile, also giving teachers some kind of big picture of what math should look like in my grade level and where do they come from and where do I need to bring them to the next grade level.
Right. And just to add to Jean's point about the population of students that you serve in terms of high number of students who are English learners, students with disabilities, do know that in Section A, there is, as Ellen mentioned, a very robust section that addresses that. And we did have a consultant provide ELD consultation throughout, so it is embedded throughout the document. Let me pose the second question to both Jean and Kim, and that is, we've been discussing the big ideas by grade levels, and you heard the overview by Dr. Bowler and Kathy. Are there successful, effective examples that you've seen with teachers teaching these big ideas? And if so, what's been the impact in terms of student learning?
Jean, I'm gonna let you go first because you're right in there.
Thanks, Kim. One of the things that I did this year, knowing with things with the big ideas, and after having students last year that were half full distance learning the entire year because my school district had a hybrid, and what kids were in class, there was something that came out of the mathematical mindset book that's for fourth grade. And it also tied in with something from UCubed with the visual number page. If you haven't seen it, definitely get onto it from UCubed. It was on whim. It's also in Joe and Kathy and Jen's mathematical mindset book. But it's looking at numbers and they're in visual pictures. So kids are starting to look, they were exploring with things that, oh, these numbers go together because the shapes were in groups of 4. So they're looking at things that are the factors of 4. They were able to start seeing multiples. I didn't do any of it. I let them have that opportunity. So I'm looking at that big idea because one of the things that my kids are going to need to do eventually, we're not there yet because my job for these last 2 weeks is opening up mathematics to them and letting them see the fun and the creativity. And I had another teacher who's covering my class right now because I still have kids in session. They were doing hailstone math. which is another very fun way of looking at numbers with patterns that you see. And as the patterns go larger and they go smaller. But it was getting the kids to talk about math. It was getting kids to notice and wonder. And they were making different models and they were having conversations with me and with each other. And then they were working on the writing. And at the same time, I'm going around and listening to them and saying, okay, this is a student that I know I'm going to need to give a little bit more support to, like a scaffold maybe for when they're having their conversation. But one of the students noticed, and when you look at this, and I wish I had the visual image page that I would hold up for you, but I forgot to bring one. It shows the prime numbers. Well, one of my students looked at me and he goes, Miss M, did you see the Connect 4 pattern? And so they got into it, the game, and I was like, oh, I better make sure I tell Joe that my kids are seeing Connect 4 with prime numbers. But it was just so much fun for the students. And we've been playing with Fibonacci this week and growing other patterns. And it's like math now is open. And we started when we've been doing kind of just like a real quick math routine in the morning, we've been decomposing numbers. And how can you decompose 30? Tell me. And I mean, I'm scribing as fast as I can, except for the kid that decides to tell me to add 2 15 times. Yeah, that's not quite as much fun. But really those big ideas and getting them into it and just seeing how much fun math is. And a lot of them are like going, okay, so when are we doing math? We're doing it soon, right? Yeah, well, we will. It's up on the schedule. I promise we're going to do it. So that's it for right now.
Thank you so much for your enthusiasm. It's just so evident, and it comes across, I am sure, for your students.
Thank you.
So let me pose the question to Kim.
The example that I had to experience with another teacher is in 3rd grade, the big idea of the number flexibility up to 100, combined with the big idea of square tiles. And the content connection there was that exploring of the changing the qualities and the taking the wholes apart and putting it back together. It was nice that this teacher was very open in not teaching in such isolation, but they really were open to the idea of all those OA standards and the MBTs and the and Fs and tying it together and letting kids explore how multiplication worked. And we as a team look back at what they did in 2nd grade and kind of to that model what Kathy had earlier with the 2nd grade example of that 4x5 and letting kids manipulate things. And because of COVID this year, we use the virtual manipulatives. And kids were just, it was amazing the conversation that was going on, whether in the breakout rooms or in the chat, where it's like, oh, so a 2 times 3 is like a 3 times 2. Oh, so it's a whole area. I mean, there was so much math that was going on, but that was not, where it was not an isolated objective. And it was I think the biggest joy for me was that the teachers, shoulders went down. It's like, oh my gosh, I can do all this together, that I don't have to do things in isolation. And there was so much conversation going on by the kids and not by me. So that was a big win.
Thank you both for sharing some very clear examples. We have about 2 minutes, so I am going to pose the last question to Ellen and Jean, and Ellen and Kim, and if you could just very briefly describe. This is a new tool, a new resource, and as county office representatives, how do you envision utilizing this guide to help educators, to support districts, both administrators and teachers?
So one of the things that I love so much about this guide is that you could read it front to back, or you can go into it in those different areas. And what we find is so incredibly helpful is that we are using it with we're using different parts of it with different stakeholders within each system. With teachers, we're finding that groups of teachers together in PLCs, they have hunches, they are seeing things. And when we can pull some of this in that connects their reality to some of the new ideas that kids need, some of the new ways of thinking about mathematics that have been developing, that the students' digital lives intersecting with all their multiple identities, the teachers have this in one place to then go to talk about these hunches and these feelings and have that backup to get more concrete in talking about it together. But we're also using it on the systems levels with administrators and with groups of principals who are really thinking about problems of practice. And so we, as the group of county office folks who meet about mathematics, we have identified some of these very universal problems of practice in moving our math programs forward at the classroom level, the district level, the individual teacher level. And we are making sort of a cross-reference within the guide of how to get into it, because it is so incredibly rich. And you can go into a section, but then I want to say, don't just stop with that section. Go to read the other sections to get the big picture as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellen. And I should have noted early on, Ellen served on our advisory, so she knows this document well. So if I can turn it over to Kim.
Sure. Within our network here, California Central Valley Network Improvement Committee, we're taking this opportunity to use continuous improvement to help roll this out to Ellen's point, not just at the teacher level, but to our leaders level, and how does it work in their own systems as well. So our initial thoughts as a team here at Tulare County Office of Ed is we're thinking about using the continuous improvement data protocol, allowing teachers just to notice and wonder and ask questions about the document, whether at their grade level or across the grade levels, and then linking it to what they're already familiarized with in the framework, and making that and building that bridge for them for the knowledge of how do I use this to better enhance what I already know. So that's our plans right now.
Okay. Excellent examples, and I know we'll have future opportunities to continue this dialogue as county office colleagues. So thank you all so much as panel members. Your perspectives have been so valuable, and we really, really appreciate hearing the voices from the field. So I am going to wrap up with just some final comments and share some examples of what are included beyond the sections A, B, and C. So we do have, as part of this document, a glossary that includes references, and we have appendices. And in the appendices, our Appendix A is a literature review. It's a full literature review that was conducted by the research team at ISTE. Appendix B includes a digital tools matrix that organizes a variety of digital tools referenced in the guide. And the digital tools that are included in this section are derived or were derived from the interviews that were conducted with the California educators who are included. In Appendix C, this is the section where we include a list of resources that are organized by each section to support the implementation of the strategies and the considerations. And then finally, in Section D, it includes sample rubrics for mathematics that were developed by Joe and Kathy. Next slide. We're very pleased to share with you that we are in the phase 2, the final phase of this project. As you have access to in the link, we have a Word version that is currently posted on the CDE website, but we are converting this it's about a 550-page document, and we are working to ensure that we make sure that this is a user-friendly digital version that is easily accessible by educators. So we're working with the ISTE team to not only finalize the PDF version of this document, but to also create an ebook. And then most importantly, we're creating a website that will allow our educators to easily access the various sections of this guide. And on this website, it includes videos of not only our content experts, but we had an opportunity to videotape our educators throughout California. So there will be links to the videos as well as the series of these webinars. We will also be working closely with our colleagues throughout the state, our CSESA partners, our geographic lead partners, our system of support partners throughout the state to continue to disseminate this information as it's released. And we are looking at a release in mid to the latter part of September. So just want to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us on this webinar and for allowing us to share highlights of this section. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Mike Torres.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hirota, panelists and presenters, for sharing your knowledge and insights on the guidance. We've been answering questions in the question and answer section throughout this presentation, so thank you for asking those questions. And it appears we don't have any more questions on our webinar, and we're basically out of time here. It's been a great webinar today. Again, many thanks to Dr. Hirota, the Sacramento County Office of Education team, and the guidance authors for your work to bring this guidance to California educators and families. Thanks also to our panelists for sharing their insights today. A recording of this webinar will be available on the CDE website in the upcoming weeks. Thank you for joining us today. We wish you all a happy and healthy school year.